I'd like to introduce Dr. James Bedford, who some of you may not know yet, or I don't know. Has anybody not met James? Do you want to stand up, James? James has been with us since the start of the year, and he's the AI guy. The AI, what was your title again? He said, just call me the AI guy. We hired James because we needed someone as an ongoing staff member who is an AI specialist, and James is that person. He is part of the teaching and learning team. And if you haven't met him yet, then you're going to meet him now, and there'll be lots more to come from James. So please welcome James.
I specifically asked her not to call me the AI guy, but that's gonna stick now. So yeah, I guess I am the AI guy. I came from UNSW. I've been teaching for the last 10 years in higher ed, and sort of not a technical specialist as much. My background's in education and pedagogy, and actually my background's in creative writing, but I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. How many of you use ChatGPT here at the moment? I think I ask this in every session, but I always like to get like a read the room sort of set up. All of you pretty much, except for a couple. Who's paying for a tool themselves out of their own wallet? Cool. Okay. A smaller portion. Is anyone using something other than ChatGPT, like another model or another tool that you dabble with? Okay. Interesting. So that sort of poll changes every time I do it. I mean, I've been doing these like sessions for a while now. A while. It's felt like a decade. The last 2 years, and it's always interesting to see the sort of the spread of people and what they're actually doing and how often they're using these tools. Like I asked that question, in early 2023 when ChatGPT had just come out, and it was sort of obviously like less, much less audience participation in terms of who was using it. But it's just shot out of the roof at the moment with how many people are actually using AI. Obviously not just teachers, but staff and professional staff and students like are using it all the time. I think we're sort of beyond the point now of like it just sort of fizzling out and the AI bubble bursting. I think it's here to stay, and I'll talk a bit about that. There was a moment that we thought it was going to be like NFTs where they just sort of disappeared into irrelevance, but I think it's safe to say it's sort of here, and it's not really going anywhere. So I'll talk a bit about the journey of AI and where we're at the moment. So I actually thought a lot about what to share today because I'm trying to put together as much as I can do in the time that I have so that you all have an understanding of like where we're at. But I'm aware that I'm standing in front of you in lunch, which is a joke that's always made at conferences, but it is true. I am standing before you in lunch, so I want to actually have time for questions. So I'm happy to have questions at the end that might be a bit provocative and perhaps might rattle a few cages. So please feel free to ask those questions, and I'll try to answer them. You don't have to be pro AI to ask questions, so please feel free to do that. But I wanted to kind of give a kind of background to where we are and to how we got here. So I am going to explore some of the opportunities and challenges around AI. I talk a lot about those, and I write a lot about those as well. But I'll also talk about the potential and where we can go, because I'm a bit of a sort of cautious optimist about these things. I think it can go well. It's not guaranteed, but I think with the right people in the room, we can make things happen. So that's where a lot of us come in as educators. So I'm excited to share that. I shouldn't have done an about me slide, but I did. But I wanted to kind of just share the fact that I've spoken to a lot of people about this stuff. So a lot of what I share and talk about is based on conversations that I'm having. So I'm a teacher by heart. I'm an educator by heart. I've always been that. And as I mentioned, my background, weirdly enough, is in creative writing. So not really a field you would think would sort of somehow segment into AI. But it just so happened that if you can write well, you actually can prompt well, and it's quite interesting. But my background is in course design and teaching, and I'm really passionate for AI for students with English as additional languages, which is really interesting, and AI for low SES, which is something I'll talk about as well. And I write a lot about this, so this is an amalgamation of, I guess, the last few years. Trying to wrap up the last few years in a short space of time is going to be difficult, but I'll do my best. This is a very poor sort of timeline of what's actually happened. I'm skipping a lot of big things, but for those that have been trying to keep up, this is sort of where we're at. So anyone remember ChatGPT when that first came out, November 2022? It was like the first time AI was sort of in the public space, really. It was sort of like we'd heard about AI and we saw it in science fiction and things like that, but no one really dealt with it on a day-to-day basis or were cognizantly aware of the fact that they were using it. Now that we have ChatGPT come out, it's sort of like it took me by surprise. I was actually on annual leave enjoying my Christmas holidays, and this thing came out, and I'm sure like many of you, I just started playing around with it. My first prompt was to write an essay about The Tempest by Shakespeare, which is the most boring prompt you could probably do, but I was really interested to see what it came up with because I had to mark a lot of essays about Shakespeare's The Tempest. And it did a pretty good job. It wasn't like, I wasn't concerned, but I had a feeling that a lot of students were going to sort of use it for good and bad, and that was sort of where I started to kind of downslide a bit and worry about the dangers of AI. But the more I used it, the more excited I got. So there was a bit of freak out ensuing, as I'm sure many of you did, but I started to see the potential. What was really interesting was in March 2023, ChatGPT 4 was released, and we saw like a pretty big leap in terms of capabilities and performance. And that was quite significant to sort of have, in a short space of time, like I guess under a year, a model like rapidly improving. And so a lot of people like to post things about what AI can't do on the internet and share, its limitations, which is all well and good. But the fact of the matter is these tools are they're getting a lot better, a lot more quickly, and the sort of issues that we're seeing that pop up in AI are sort of getting solved pretty quickly. I won't go too much into the debate about the sort of the scaling laws of AI and whether or not it actually does get better and better and better. But at the moment, we're seeing great advancements. Interestingly enough, I think ChatGPT 4.5 has sort of didn't really, for me in my testing recently, I don't think it's done that much of a kind of leap from 3.5 to 4. I'm not sure if anyone's had a chance to test that yet, but there's some interesting results there. Has anyone had a chance to test 4.5 yet in the paid subscription? A couple of you? It's really interesting using it because it tends to, when I ask it a question, it's very personalized. It sort of knows what I've asked it before and it includes that in its response. Like I asked it, what can you do? And it gave me I can help you with creative writing and education and AI and all these things that I do that it knows that I want to hear. And I thought that was quite interesting. So that's sort of where things are headed, it seems. The memory capabilities of these tools are starting to reveal themselves. Anyways. We then saw other competitors. So ChatGPT was the only one out there really that was doing anything. And then all of a sudden, Google, whose technology basically funded and fueled ChatGPT, came out with Gemini. And all of a sudden, we have other people in the market. I mentioned Sora because Sora was the sort of the text to video generation, which kind of made people realize that generative AI was more than just text. Generative AI was images, it was video, it was audio. And that was quite astonishing, the capabilities of text to video all of a sudden. And I think we've well and truly surpassed the uncanny valley in terms of what these tools can produce. We're getting to the point where it can make a human look like a human, and it's very hard to tell if it's AI generated. So it's quite scary in some ways, but exciting in others. I do a lot of workshops with NIDA actually, and I was quite nervous to do workshops at NIDA because of all the writers' strikes and things that are happening with AI. But funnily enough, there was majority of the people in those classrooms were using these tools in their creative practice. So there was some that weren't, or choosing not to, obviously, but majority were actually using them. So I thought that was quite interesting. I mentioned Apple iOS product being integrated into OpenAI because, and I think they're actually switching at the moment to another provider, but that was sort of the peak ubiquity moment, I felt. That was when ChatGPT was in everyone's pocket, and now all of a sudden these tools are here and everyone has access to them. So in many ways, they're some of the most equitable tools you could get. We have billion-dollar technology in our pockets. Everyone can access them with a sign-up. But there's that old saying of if it's free, you're the product. So what are we actually giving to these companies when we do sign up for free? So that I'll talk about enterprise versions of these products and what we can hopefully get happening for you all. But that's not my decision. It's something I can only suggest. In terms of workspace computers, so the agentic stuff is crazy. Claude announces it's agentic AI, which is basically just controlling your computer to do stuff. If anyone's had a chance to use deep research, it's sort of like an agent, agentic in a way. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of these courses that we have now that are online can be controlled by a workspace computer. So it's pretty easy to navigate an LMS with an AI tool and do almost nothing and get an accreditation. People are doing that at the moment. They're passing courses using AI tools. So something that universities will have to consider in the future is how they safeguard these tools with like firewalls and protocols to avoid that happening. DeepSeek R1, if anyone had a chance to play around with that, there was some interesting messaging that sort of came out about DeepSeek R1 and safety and protocol, but all these companies steal data, so it's not like it's anything new. But DeepSeek R1 was actually quite prolific in terms of what it did, because it came out of nowhere and all of a sudden was competing with the best available models on the planet, so and at a fraction of the cost. And I funnily enough, I always like to test DeepSeek with creative writing outputs, because that's sort of my area, and DeepSeek was like by far and large the most impressive one that I'd seen. I shared it with my writing circle, my friends in the writing space, and they were like, who wrote this? So yeah, it's getting to the point now where it's like producing publishable fiction, I would say, which is quite scary, and so fast, yeah. So yeah, we the models are getting better. A lot of the problems we saw early on, are getting resolved. Although I guess they're still popping up. There are some of the images in David West's slide that were AI generated, and you could sort of tell by the weird sort of hands and things. But they're resolving these issues. So a lot of the problems that are coming up, like hallucinations or confabulations, I think we're now supposed to call them, are getting resolved. So it's an interesting space to be in. I guess the big question now is whether companies focus on creating ethical LLMs and whether that's at all possible given environmental impacts and the mitigation of bias. But I think a big thing that we need to be thinking about is that there's a dark side to AI, and that's just a fact. And I think it can turn out for good. That's my optimistic take on it all, though. I don't know what that's worth, but it takes people like yourselves to use these tools well and to be aware of what they can and can't do, so that you can inform your students about these things as well. So that was much longer than I wanted to, but oh well. We'll have time for questions. Someone remind me when it's like 10 minutes to go, because I'll keep talking. I wanted to talk about the AI survey results from the college, which was actually a pretty good uptake, I think. 75 of you responded, so I guess that's a good amount from what I've heard in terms of surveys. But it gave a really good snapshot in terms of how people were using AI across the college. So this is obviously all staff, not just educators. But one of the really interesting findings was that 88% of you are using generative AI tools, and 66% of you are doing it daily. That's a pretty big number, and that's actually sort of consistent with other universities and actually students, how much students are using it. I would guess that this number's gone up since then, because this survey was done in December. I could be wrong, but yeah, a lot of people are using it, and it's being used regularly. Now, I think I might move on from common use cases. I mean, there was a lot, but basically people were using it to summarize things, and I'll share some slides in a minute, some studies from Anthropic that have been released, who own Claude, which is another large language model. A lot of people are using it for lesson planning, ideation. This is a very short summary of what people are using it for. There's actually more detail in the report, which is on the Learning and Teaching website if you want to look at it. But there was this really great quote. So whoever wrote this, if this is you, maybe come and let me know. This is great. So they said, I think generative AI has the potential to open up new learning opportunities worth exploring, but it also shakes to the core current pedagogies and assessment practices. As educators, we need to keep an open mind and explore the affordances of generative AI to enhance our students' learning and prepare them with the right skill set for tertiary study and beyond. I thought that just sort of captures everything, really. So yeah, well done whoever wrote that. A cool thing about coming here was that a lot of you were very excited and optimistic about using AI, and I thought that was great. From the use cases that I was reading through on the report, there's some very nuanced uses of AI. It was beyond the obvious stuff, and there was a lot of excitement around it. So I think that's great. It's good to be excited and curious, because I find that's sort of where I'm at the moment. I have my concerns, but I'm also very excited about the potential for these tools as well. In terms of navigating challenges, so this is a study that was done a while back, actually, with some of the universities. 4 universities in Australia participated. And again, it's quite similar to what we saw before in the previous slide with, a bunch of students are using it. They're using it daily. Interestingly enough, they also believe it can offer significant benefits to their study and support. So I guess that's sort of no surprise, really, seeing what these tools can do. a more interesting study actually, which was just done by Anthropic. So this is from assessing the history of LLM conversations that people have been having. Has anyone seen this figure before? It sort of did the rounds, on like different social media, LinkedIn and different websites. Basically just studying people's conversations. It was the first sort of major report that put together what people were actually using AI for. And you can see here that like critical thinking, lo and behold, was the number one thing. Active listening, reading comprehension, writing, things that you would assume people use AI for. But just sort of see it in writing, I thought was quite sobering. And I'll talk a bit about the sort of challenges with AI and critical thinking, because that's something I've sort of been deep diving later today. And I'm sure many of you heard me talk about this before. So I'm going to share this moment I had on the train. I've shared this with some of you before, but this took me by surprise. I've been using these tools for like the last 2 years, probably every day, to see what they can do. And so with that in mind, I was on the train home from work, and this lady dropped her earpods in the corner of her train seat. And don't worry, this is going somewhere. And all of a sudden, my brain went to ask ChatGPT how to get those out, like as a solution. And it was like this technological reflex, which, it took me by surprise. Obviously, I didn't ask ChatGPT that silly question, but the fact that my brain knew I could save the cognitive effort of coming up with a solution if I just offloaded it, that was there for me, right? And if you think about students, cost of living, mental health crisis, all sorts of things going on at the moment, just getting to university can be a struggle, like learning can be a struggle, working full time. It is a temptation to offload a lot of the learning we want them to do. And that's sort of the environment that we're facing at the moment. There's so much potential for these tools, but there's also a lot of danger just sort of letting them loose. So I'm really interested in exploring how we mitigate that decline of critical thinking, which we saw in the previous slide. So I've written about this, others have written about this. I just wrote a blog post, so it's nothing exciting. But some people have done articles and researched this. If anyone saw the recent Microsoft researchers did a study on the impact of Gen AI and critical thinking, look, the study's not perfect. It uses self-reporting and it's not an RCT and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of these studies are starting to reveal that there is a sort of cognitive impact that happens when we use these tools regularly, right? That's just what's happening. And you'll probably find we'll see this happen. Maybe in a few years, it'll reveal itself even more. And Toby Walsh, actually, interestingly enough, just recently wrote about this and said that he fears that we'll be losing our ability to think critically, that his AI dystopia is not computers getting smarter than us, but humans getting dumber than AI. So take that how you like. These studies are good to check out. I wrote about my experience for Edutopia if you're interested to read that. It sort of captures some of my, which I won't go into, potential solutions to mitigating the decline in critical thinking for teachers. So I just don't have time to kind of go into them. So, so how do we avoid the decline in critical thinking? How do we ensure we don't use tools like Copilot in order to switch to autopilot? That's the sort of question I want to propose to you all. I love this quote. Many of you have probably seen it before. I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so that I can do my laundry and dishes. That pretty much captures what we want. We don't want to just let these tools go and do education for us or do learning for us. We want to use them to be able to help us do these things that we've been doing in a way that's better. And I think they can. I've been able to create resources for students that I couldn't have created without AI. But it relied on my expertise and my knowledge and my understanding of how students think and learn to be able to do those things. It is about embracing opportunities. And I want to kind of share some of the opportunities that do currently exist. For me, I was a first in family to graduate, go to university. And I do see the University Accord and AI really aligning. And I think there's a really interesting piece there. It's a shame our keynote speaker wasn't here to talk about this, but the research on transition pedagogy, so coming into the university first year, is very interesting when you apply the AI tools that can support that process. So you've got things like scalable mentorship. Every student has a sort of supplemental support aid to studying and teaching and learning. 24/7 guidance, not replacing teachers, but just being an additional service or support that students can access. The processing of, administrative tasks, enrollment, financial aid, all these questions that are often in silos and difficult to navigate for a student can actually be brought together in one place through AI. There's quite a lot it can do. So I do see the kind of university accord, and if some of you have been familiar with what's happening, there's an aim to grow the university and for people to go into higher education. So there's 2.1% to 3.3% for First Nation students, and 17% to 20.2% for SES students, and also students from rural, regional, and remote areas. So there's definitely going to be more students coming through the system, which is amazing. More access to higher education is great, and I actually do see AI as supporting that process for students. I know, like when I was at school, a lot of my friends had tutors. We couldn't afford a tutor, so if I had have had access to something like ChatGPT, that would have been incredible. I actually would have really helped my studying, my HSC. I think it would have been a great assistance to the work that I was doing. So I do see us as having a golden opportunity, and I really believe that. I think that the survey results show that UNSW College is in a good position to kind of like start doing some cool things, and cool things are already happening. And I do see that, if you add your expertise to these tools, you can create incredible things. That's what I've been seeing more and more. And I've even in the short time that I've been here, I've managed to work with quite a lot of you on little projects here and there. And just the things that I've seen have really just, surprised me and amazed me. So there's a lot we can do when we combine those two things. And I love this quote. I've never quoted Steve Jobs in my life, but I just found this actually AI gave it to me. So there you go. Innovation is the ability to see change as an opportunity, not a threat. So I really like that sentiment, and I try to sort of hold on to that. Has anyone heard of vibe coding? Okay, so vibe coding is great. So the term vibe coding, I'll just read this out. So the term vibe coding was first introduced by computer scientist Andrej Karpathy in February 2025, so it's very recent. He described it as a process where one fully gives in to the vibes, embraces exponentials, and forgets that the code even exists. So this is the method that coders use now. Because these tools have gotten so good at coding, you kind of don't need to really code as much as you once had to. And so you can sort of just code with vibes and what you want the thing to do using natural language processing. What this basically means is if you are an educator or just someone without a coding background, i.e. me, you can create stuff using natural language processing. So this was done in Poe.com. If anyone's used Poe.com, you can go to it for free, sign up in your burner email or whatever you use, and make an account. And if you go to App Creator, it actually uses Claude Sonnet 3.7 as its sort of backhouse engine, which is incredibly good at, as we've seen, coding. I asked it, this is one prompt, I asked it, I want you to create an app that acts like an AI-guided learning module, walking users through generative AI and large language model concepts in a fun, interactive way, blah, blah, blah. And it gave me like a very, not only interactive, but the content was a very high standard. In one shot. I didn't have to refine or edit it. I didn't have to change any of the links that were broken. The entire thing just worked. That is amazing. I think that the ability to make our teaching more engaging and interactive, I think, is going to be a really good thing for students. This is just like the tip of the iceberg. This is just like a 5-minute thing that I tried. I'm excited to see what the potential is with tools like this. But this is what I encourage people to do. With taking your expertise and your background, seeing what these tools can do is a real opportunity for innovation and doing some really incredible things. And in a lot of people, a lot of fields have been sort of pulling away from AI for fair enough reason. But we actually need a lot of those people seeing and testing the limitations of these things and seeing what they can do. Like at the moment, there's no real creative writing benchmarks for AI. Like that's something that people haven't done because a lot of people in the humanities are sort of slightly pulling away from AI. Others are kind of embracing it. So we actually need people to kind of get in there and see what these tools can do and call them out when they're not doing the things that they should be doing. So that's why I encourage people, like I don't suggest everyone uses AI. If you don't want to use it, that's great. But I encourage people just to consider what it might be able to do for them because we're seeing some incredible outputs already. So where to next? So I would love it if all staff and students had access to good enterprise versions of the best LLMs, and that's all I'll say on that. But being able to have access to the best models, the best tools, the best image generators all in the one place, that's possible now. I'm not saying that we can go ahead and do that. I'm just proposing that we can and hope we can. But there's a lot of tools at the moment which offer playground LLMs that you can actually access and switch between the different models, which is really cool. I would also love to people to be able to have confidence in using AI. So if we could push it to, in the report, it was 3.5 staff were feeling confident using AI tools in their day-to-day. I would like it to be 4.5. I don't know why I went with 5. I could have just gone with 5, but I just felt to be a bit safe there. 4.5 is a bit more realistic. So, okay, so with all that being said, excited to announce an AI in Education co-op. I think there have been things like this going on, here and there, but this is another thing. Now, you can scan the QR code and sign up. Basically, we're going to meet monthly. We're going to have presentations. There's going to be separate workshops run by the Learning and Teaching team, exploring current topics, themes. There'll be guest speakers. There'll be conversations from leading experts all around the world. And there'll be a mastery of AI. Now, this isn't something for people that feel confident using AI. This is something for everyone. So this is a space. I would love it if people that were perhaps more reserved about AI, like having a voice in these sessions, because often they're the ones that are sort of keeping silent. And we need those voices in these conversations. So do get along wherever you see yourself on that sort of spectrum of AI use. I think that's all I'll say, but I do want to have time for questions. I will end on this quote. This is by a Pope Francis approved message on a recent letter about AI. And he said that teachers, I don't know if he said this, but he approved it. Teachers do more than convey knowledge. They model essential human qualities and inspire the joy of discovery. Their presence motivates students both through the content they teach and the care they demonstrate for their students. So I'll end on that, and then we'll do some questions. Questions? Is there a roving mic or?
Am I talking to the mic? Hello. Hi.
Quote. You can actually, you can read this if you look up Antiqua at Nova. You can look at the whole document there. There's a question over here.
Hello.
Riley.
Great talk. Thanks. I wonder, have you thought about the use of the terminology here? I notice you've used artificial intelligence throughout this when you're clearly primarily meaning large language models and similar generative AI. Do you think that can be an issue in people using it both in the education space and outside, where the term artificial intelligence kind of conveys the idea that it's a knowledge machine, and it's not a knowledge machine, it's a words machine. And I think there are definitely people using this for things that it is not trained for and it's not appropriately used for. Do you think we need to change the way we talk about it and the terminology we use?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that I've started to see. So early on, there was like this, all of a sudden, this realization that we kept using the word AI to mean generative AI, and those two terms got conflated. And then people started to call that out, and so they started delineating when they were talking about Gen AI and when they were talking about AI. And then all of a sudden that just disappeared, and we're back to calling AI Gen AI. I use AI as a collective term to mean all those things. So it's hard to kind of cover everything. But I do agree, we need to be careful how we talk about these things so that people don't conflate, that generative AI is just one thing that produces text. It can do many things. And AI is a whole separate thing in and of itself. Gen AI is a kind of AI, and it involves similar processes, but it's different. So I do agree, we should have clear terminology around these conversations. But if you look at a lot of the literature around AI, it's sort of those two things are becoming conflated. And almost, I wonder if that's, a good thing, like putting the two together. But it just seems to be the way that people are talking about AI now is to mean everything under that category. So it is a, unfortunate thing, I guess. But good point. Other question over here?
Hi, I just wanted a question about mitigating the risks to cognitive loading that AI poses. And do you see a period where we may have to do courses to maintain our cognitive loading in order to maintain accreditation or something?
That's it. Yeah, I think it's a valid question. I think this is something that educators need to be really thinking about, because I guess we're all kind of guinea pigs. Like, we don't know what the long-term impacts of this stuff is going to be. I'm sure, it's a really cliched expression, but if you don't use it, you lose it, right? Like if we're not exercising that problem-solving ability, that thinking on our feet, that reflexivity, again and again, it's going to atrophy surely as a result. So how we then get AI to sort of help support our own thinking rather than do it for us is really important. So one really basic strategy I use is I tell students to think before they prompt. So don't ask AI to solve the problem for you. Think about what the solution might be and then go to AI. So don't skip that process of thinking for yourself, because if you do skip that process of thinking for yourself, you're going to sway to and fro with every idea that's thrown at you. You're not going to have that sort of grounding of, okay, here's what I think. And I think what we'll see is students will start to struggle to sort of communicate what they think and what they feel. We're already seeing that. They really struggle to sort of, from a humanities position, write about their informed opinion. They often resort to just summarizing other people's ideas, and they fail to kind of come up with their own ideas often. And I think AI can sort of perpetuate that. So there's people that are using AI tools to make mind maps, and I just think that's ridiculous. Make a mind map with a pencil or something, do it yourself. There's no point in outsourcing that sort of thing to AI. So yeah, these are the things that we're sort of, there's a pedagogy called visible thinking, which is really useful as a way, think, pair, share, and all those sorts of techniques that we use to sort of to draw out what we think is and what students are thinking can be really really useful. Some people are analysing chat logs like ChatGPT history for assessing the learning process as well. So yeah, and this is an exciting thing we can all come up with ourselves. Is how do we mitigate that cognitive decline using these tools.
This is one of these how much do you agree questions, but you don't have to give us a whole essay. How much do you agree that university courses are going to be designed to teach students to use AI better in their field?
That's a really good question. A lot. I think you would be silly not to teach students how to use AI at all, because it's going to be expected they're going to have to use it at some point. I don't know if it falls on the responsibility of the particular course to then integrate that into their curriculum or their course design. That's just up to the coordinator, I guess. But I think we'd be silly to just let students into the workforce without having the skills. And whether that comes from the individual courses or AI literacy, programs within the university, I don't know. I guess it's like a new academic skill, isn't it? It's like using a tool that can help you do things. So I don't know. That's a good question. Another question here. Yep.
Yeah. So from an environmental perspective, does the college and university have any initiatives or plans to help counteract the significant environmental impact of our AI use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a huge environmental impact, and it's often a topic that sort of gets skipped over at the end of workshops as a side addition. But there are huge environmental costs to particularly training these models, not necessarily your day-to-day conversations. It's more so actually building these models that use a lot of energy, a lot of water, have a massive carbon footprint. We know that a lot of the big tech companies now are buying nuclear power plants and wanting to use nuclear energy. So that's starting to happen. So there are huge environmental factors here. I don't know if the college has one in place, but perhaps that's something, we could work together on, or perhaps if you're interested in working on that, we could make that happen. I think these are the conversations we need to be having. And I think that's a really good point to sort of raise. So yeah, perhaps we'll watch that space.
I have a question over here. Hi. Can I just ask, you mentioned that AI is improving, and obviously we all know that it's improving a lot. My question is, in what ways? So is it getting better at doing the things it can already do, or is it expanding in the functionality of things that it's able to do? So right now it can recognize patterns, and it works on, from my understanding, the probability of what the next most likely thing to say is going to be. Is it just getting better at doing that, or is it starting to expand in the range of things that it can do? And I'm asking this mostly in the context of assessment and how we assess students and how we teach students and what we teach students.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I'll try to unpack that from my perspective as briefly as I can. So I always test LLMs, particularly LLMs, with their creative writing output. That's my go-to. And this is something I encourage others to do. Test it with your background. What you know, test it on that. Because then you can verify and vet it. I've been testing it with creative writing output since day dot, and I've seen them progressively get better, objectively get better. And one of the interesting things is, obviously creative writing is very subjective, but if you look at the improvements that we've seen from model to model to model, we've gotten to the point now where, like I mentioned before, DeepSeek is objectively writing like publishable level fiction, and it's doing so in a few seconds. So from a kind of, I guess, a humanities point of view, we're seeing its ability to put together words improving gradually, to the point now where it's doing it as good as some of the best humans. It's not better than them, but it's doing it as good as. Now, that's limited to its capacity to just be trained on what it was trained on, which was the internet as it was. And that's changing. The internet isn't always going to be what it was. It's going to be filled with AI stuff. And so we then have maybe like a degradation of the models where they get perhaps progressively worse. That's the kind of argument that people are making as well. So I don't from a maths perspective, I'm like all ears to hear if you think it's getting better. But I do know from people in the coding industry, they say that they can see that its coding is getting much better. But yeah, there are metrics for this. If you're interested, the chatbot arena has a sort of a metric of the different models and where they're at. It changes all the time in terms of who is the leader in those capabilities, but it's sort of like blind tested, so people vote on all different outputs. So the chatbot arena, it's actually a pretty good thing to do in class. You can put two bots together and like test the outputs of each one. I've got to wrap up, sorry, I'm keeping you guys between lunch. Yeah, so chatbot arena is pretty fun. One last question.
Hi, I think I'm last. It kind of flows on from that one. From a teacher in the classroom perspective, because you're saying that the output of AI is getting better and better, what advice or tips would you have for teachers on the ground to be able to continually differentiate between a student who might be using AI to generate their responses or not?
Yeah, that's a really valid question. And it's one that I'm wondering how I go about answering that. So I don't think we can detect a student that has used AI. That's my opinion. We know that with Turnitin's AI detector, it's problematic. There is a huge false positive rate and a false negative rate, so it means that it's ultimately going to misconstrue whether or not students used AI. But it's still useful, some say, as evidence in that process of seeing whether or not a student has or hasn't used AI. We tried using words like delve and landscape and realm to point to the student potentially using AI. There was a study that was done where it found that ChatGPT really prefers M dashes, and it's like, okay, well I like M dashes. Does that mean I'm using AI to write my story? Like, so it's. I wonder about whether or not we can actually tell, but it's like sometimes you can tell. Like you can tell, like it's just so obvious. I saw it like, it was like night and day. I used to have students do blog posts for a science fiction course that I was teaching. And it was like, comparing it to 2023 to 2022, those blog posts got much, much better. All of a sudden, out of nowhere. To the point where it was like, there's no way you're writing this. After teaching this course for years, all of a sudden these tools, so I had to get rid of blog posts, online blog posts, unfortunately. And that was an adjustment I had to make. I'm not saying everyone gets rid of blog posts, don't worry. But how we tell, I don't think we can. I don't think there is a way. The process is so infused. I often use AI in my editing and writing process. I might write something, have AI throw in some ideas, put those in, adjust it until it's my own. Like, I would struggle to explain that to someone, like that where the AI stops and where I begin. Like that's becoming too blurry. So it's almost better just to kind of, I guess, not care as much. Like, I know University of Sydney is banning the banning of AI, so students can use it to as much as they want. So it's like for certain assessments, obviously not closed book exams and things. Their two-lane approach is really interesting if you're interested in looking at that. But anyways, we'll continue this conversation after. I think I've got to wrap up. So thank you all. Thank you very much.